Buju, Nin, Cassandra Spade, Dishnikas, Mishki Gogomang Indonji, Numain Dotam, a Kujachingish Gunaganingi Gion Bikai. Hello everyone, my name is Cassandra Spade. I'm from Mishki Gogomang First Nation and I'm from the Sturgeon Clan. Today we're going to be focusing on lesson 4, which is all about organizing, strategic planning, and being prepared in our activism. So this is lesson 4 of the Indigenous Grassroots Activism unit. At the same time, we're going to be connecting these ideas of organization, strategic planning, and being prepared to our previous lessons. So we'll focus on situating ourselves in our communities, understanding our core values, recognizing the power of place and who we are, and talking about key messaging, because a huge proponent of this and a huge component of this is that once we develop a key message and understand the complexities of a problem and the impacts, we propose a solution. And this is the part where we want to plan for that. So we've already planned in our key message. We understand that planning is important in that stage. Now we want to plan about how we're going to bring it to the community, how we're going to engage in the community, and how we're going to get the ball rolling. So in saying that, we're going to talk a little bit about the brief overview of strategic planning as the main theme. And so first we're going to talk about hosting and sharing space, and really those like foundational pieces of organization. So how do we host space? How do we share space? And how do we organize in ways that support community engagement, involvement, and participation? Then we will look at a new tool, and it's called the Strengths, Weaknesses, Opportunities, and Threats Analysis, or SWOT for short. And we're going to look at how this tool can help you prepare in planning. So it's a holistic way of looking at your community and how to prepare for your activist solution or your activist goals. Lastly, we'll look at community engagement, and we'll look at all the ways that we can involve, inform, collaborate, support our communities and what that looks like. And at the same time, still talking about strategic planning and the importance. So you may remember from our last lesson, the importance of preparing a key message. So doing the research, understanding the complexity of an issue, and then developing a solution based off of that understanding. So you're preparing a key message beforehand, and now you know your issue. And so in this space, when we're talking about hosting, and now we want to bring our solution to the community and we want more people to jump on board and support us in the work that we're doing, sometimes we have to host spaces. And so when we host space, we often want to create a welcoming atmosphere, an engaging one, and an environment that is very comfortable and warm for people. So you want to think maybe about different ways of arranging chairs. Maybe you want to do it in a circle so that we're all sitting together and looking at one another. Or maybe you want to do the chairs in rows and there's someone at the front of the room and they're lecturing. So you want to think about the different ways of engaging space and thinking of space. At the same time, do you want to bring snacks and drinks and food? Do you want it to be a potluck, or what are you interested in doing? So what kind of space are you making? And at the same time, we want to recognize that security and safety are really important elements of hosting. So when we create space and we want to share our activism and our message and our solutions and our ideas and possibilities for our communities, we also want to make sure we're creating safe and secure spaces. So when I'm hosting a space, I always bring elders into the space, and I always bring mental health or personal support workers who, if someone is experiencing a moment where they need some extra support, there are people there to assist them. And so it's really important to think of safety and security, especially when we're trying to make social change. And once again, we remember social change requires a long period of time and requires a lot of energy and resources and things like that. And so some people may be resistant to change, and change can bring about new ideas and conversations. So you really want to create a safe and supportive, secure space for people. And then when we share space, sometimes we have to ask questions on how do we engage in the space. So are we talking a lot? Are we not talking enough? How are we facilitating conversation? Are we bringing prepared questions ahead of time to share with people? And if we find ourselves speaking a lot and taking up a lot of space, how do we step back And how do we let other people take up space so that we can listen? Because part of activism is understanding multiple different perspectives and advocating for things that best reflect your community and yourself. And that depends on what your community is. Like we said, there are 3 different types of communities: the geographic, the area and land, the shared identities, and then the shared interests, goals, or attitudes. And so how do we share space with this? And sometimes we need to jump in and we need to be really involved and get the discussion going and get people engaged and talk about the specific issue. And other times it's really important to take a step back and listen. So in hosting and sharing space, what we are doing is we are collectively organizing and coming together to organize and self-organize. You may remember at the grassroots level, it's the most local level possible. So self-organizing is collective organizing and coming together. And you're doing this to develop a strategic plan. So if you're talking about your proposed solution of your key message and you want to develop a strategic plan of it, make sure to bring pens, pencils, or whatever you need. You could put Post-it notes on a wall, you can make an art piece, you could do whatever, just as long as you're recording the ideas and the planning process. So you really want to engage with community members about that. And it will help you to address your issue and problem that you're trying to do. At the same time, when we're recording things in our communities, we are thinking about the safety and the security of people participating and sharing space with us. We also want to think about consent. And so when we are recording things or writing things down, we want to make sure that we're asking the community for consent when we're collecting those pieces of data or information. And so when we record things in particular, and maybe we're recording an elder or we're speaking to someone about a particular piece of knowledge, you want to make sure that you ask for consent so that you can put that information into your plan. Other than that, just remember to think about the safety, the security, and the consent of hosting space and sharing space. So we're going to look at the new tool. Some of you may already know what this is and some may not. So this is called a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats analysis, or for short, SWOT. And what this does is it allows you to look at the whole picture of a plan. So you can prepare yourself before the plan comes. And you can think of all of the things that you have, things that you need, the opportunities, and so forth. So for example, when we take an example or an issue like we could talk about Indigenous languages in Canada, like in our key messaging, and how we want to bring immersion schools into our communities, we can think of the strengths. So in my home community, there are a lot of people who speak Anishinaabe or the Indigenous tongue of the community. There is already a school that's built there. There's a library with materials for Indigenous language. And there's a lot of knowledge around how to understand Indigenous languages, speak it, and teach it in the community. So already we're identifying a lot of strengths in the plan that we want to implement. So taking that key message, the problem being the decline of Indigenous languages in Canada, and the proposed solution we developed, which was immersion schools in our communities, we can work to create a plan using SWOT. So our strengths are that we have the language speakers in the communities, we have a school, we have a library, and now we start to look at the weaknesses. And so what does our proposed plan lack? What do we not have in the community? What do we need to support that big picture that we're trying to imagine, that big idea, that big possibility? And so in this particular example, we might not have enough space for our immersion program. So we might need to add on to the building, or we might need more teachers in the community, or maybe we need more linguists and grammar specialists to understand the grammar of Indigenous languages. Or maybe we need more books and resources in the community. So this piece is just supposed to address what else you need to support your solution. Then we can look at threats. So what are the possible threats, or what might hinder your plan? So an example might be, maybe there's not enough funding to fund a high school program or an immersion program in your school because there are immersion programs elsewhere. Or maybe the threat or the thing that hinders your plan is that it takes a long time to develop. So you need a couple years to develop an immersion program. And lastly, we look at opportunities. So if we build an immersion program in the community, what are the possibilities and what are the opportunities? Well, we can develop a lot of language speakers. We can create a space where people are speaking language and people are there's a transmission of knowledge and culture and stories. And so we can start to think of the opportunities that these kids who go through the immersion program, they can become teachers in our communities because we need teachers that speak our Indigenous languages. And so there are lots of job opportunities, lots of schooling opportunities. And so we can think of all of those things. The main point of SWOT is that you're developing that holistic approach, or you're looking at all the possibilities of your plan. So when you're looking at your key message and you're wanting to start to engage your community, you have to think about, okay, what are all the possible options in the plan? So when we host the space and we share the space and we say, our solution to language decline in Canada is we want to implement an immersion programming. And then the community can look at the strengths, the weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and you can become more prepared. For example, if you go outside of the community and you're advocating for the importance of an immersion program or the importance of Indigenous languages, you are fully aware and very much prepared with all of the possible avenues of this. So if somebody asks you, well, what are the threats or what are the opportunities or why would you need this and what are the strengths? You're really prepared because you've created a SWOT analysis. Next, we look to community engagement. So we created the space and we're hosting a space and we're doing a SWOT analysis about our proposed solution for an issue. And now we need to engage our communities. And so what does that look like? Well, we have the planning process. We have different types and different levels of participation and engagement. We have to create a time frame. So when will our planning start? When will it end? When will our specific, if we're talking about the immersion programming, when will that start? When will that end? And what does this look like? Then we'll look at our materials. And from our SWOT analysis, we will know what we're missing and we'll know what we have, so we can develop an understanding of the materials that we need and already have. And at the same time, we can look at activities. So how do we want to raise awareness, or how do we want to talk about this specific project or activism goal? And how are we going to engage our communities? Like we said before, when we were talking about hosting space, do we want to do circle groups and we're having an open dialogue and conversation? Do we want to do more like a keynote speaker where the chairs are all in rows and someone's at the front and speaking? Or do we want to have panel sessions where we have different activists come together from different and diverse perspectives to talk about immersion programming or whatever it may be? And so when we think of that, we have to think about how do we engage our communities and how do we talk about our activism in our communities. So using this, these levels of participation here, we can look at the first, which is to inform. So we want to provide information and raise awareness about an ongoing problem. So let's continue to use the example of decline of Indigenous languages. So we want to inform our communities the importance of Indigenous language. So we might use our key message, but we also might use all of the facts, statistics, and data and research that we found in our impact. So we knew the problem and then we did all that research in the impact, and now we want to inform. So we might give some fact sheets or brochures or information, books of information. We might create a website and have an open house. So this is how we want to inform our community about this ongoing and very pervasive issue. And in doing so, we're involving the community in our activism. And this is really important. That reinforces the idea of situating ourselves in community and that we're interconnected. So we have a responsibility to inform our community or to share with our community all of the things that we are learning. Another level is to consult or consultation. And so we want to get public feedback because we are trying to advocate for a very specific thing. And if we continue to use the same issue of the language decline, we want to consult with our communities to get diverse perspectives, to understand our communities. So we might do this through surveys to get people to answer questions about language, or a focus group where we can ask those questions and host that space and share that space, and public meetings. So that brings back our hosting and our sharing space skills. So we want to consult with our communities and get their feedback, which just strengthens our solutions to the issues. Because really what we're trying to do is we're trying to create communities that are more reflective of the ways we see them, and we want to create meaningful change. So we also want to include our community in part of that. So we're engaging our community. Next, we can look to involve our community. So we've informed them, maybe we've consulted with them, and now we're involving them in our activism. So it's to work directly with the public and include their concerns, their thoughts, their perspectives, and what they think about the problem and the proposed solution. So you could do this through workshops or educational sessions or whatever it may be. So when you're talking about your activism, you want to involve your community because it's so important that you can get the collective organizing and collective involvement, which leads to collective action. So the more people you involve in your activism, the better, because you're attempting to make change, and change can require a lot of time, specifically social change. So we want to involve our communities to create social change, which we know takes a long amount of time. Next, we can look to collaborate with our communities. So perhaps we want to partner with our community, or we want to create a program with our community. So in our example, we're advocating for an immersion program. And now we want to partner with our community because we've informed them about the issue, we've consulted with them about the solution, we've involved them about thinking about how to bring change, and now we're collaborating to implement that change. So there might be things like a youth council or participatory decision-making where people can decide on how things are run. So let's say at this point, we've developed an immersion program and we've collaborated with the community and we've made this program together. And now we have to decide on how to implement it and how to use it. And so creating these kind of meaningful acts of collaboration are really important to our activism. And lastly, we want to empower or support our communities. So we know that the problem was there was a loss or a decline of Indigenous languages spoken in some communities, and we use the example of the solution of an immersion program. So now we want to give the immersion program or support the immersion program so that the community can lead it, and it's a community-led solution. So the community can work to implement it and sustain it and keep it running. So all along this, your activism journey was to create meaningful change. You informed your community about the problem and the complexities of the problem, understanding the root causes and the impacts, and then you proposed the solution and you consulted with your community about the solution. You got their feedback, so it only strengthened your solution. You involved your community in creating that solution, so implementing it and making it a real thing. And you did this through workshops and educational sessions, and then you collaborated. You actually created your solution. You brought it to life, and you partnered with your community, because the more involvement and community participation you have, the better. And you want this solution to be meaningful and to be sustainable and to run for a long period of time. And then lastly, the solution has come to the community, and now the community can support it and engage with it, and you've brought meaningful change to your community, all from thinking about this idea or this one idea. And so community engagement is so important to activism, because we want to make change in our communities and we need to engage them. So we need to be present and we need to participate in them. So in summary of today's lesson, we talked about hosting space and how do we do that? What kind of environments do we make? We talked about sharing space, and sometimes we have to lead the conversation, and sometimes we have to step back and listen. And so developing skills around hosting and conversation and facilitation and creating discussion. Then we looked at organizing and strategic planning. So when we were talking about our key messages, we prepared and we understood the complexity of issues and the root causes of issues. And we thought about how and why these issues exist, and we proposed the solution. So in doing so, we can use a SWOT analysis, or if we remember, our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats analysis, which addresses a problem, it understands the impact, and proposes an achievable, actionable solution. So we looked in a holistic way, the strengths of our potential solution, the weaknesses of the solution, the threats of the solution, and the opportunities. And so we are preparing ourselves and creating a plan so that we know what we are doing and we're being very strategic about it. And lastly, we looked at our community engagement. So how do we engage our communities? And then the steps of community engagement, are we involving? Are we informing? Are we consulting? Are we collaborating and empowering? Because ultimately the change we want to make in the communities, we want to see, and that requires a long period of time. And we know change takes a long time, but if we continuously work at it and advocate for change, it can happen. And it's so vitally important to involve our communities in that process, because our communities are our places of power. They fuel who we are. And therefore, when we give back to our communities take care of us. It's that idea, when we take care of someone, that relationship of taking care, it's reciprocated and it's given back. So reinforcing also the idea of interconnectedness, and that when we take care of the land or our community, it takes care of us. And that's so important. To participate in activism that is reciprocal is really important, or interconnected. So I say thank you today, and I look forward to seeing you all in lesson 5, and miigwech.